All right, welcome back to another edition of the Powers on Sports podcast. This is our New Year's week edition. Hope everybody had a nice Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, and whatever other holiday that you celebrate. Hope everybody had a great weekend, and obviously we have New Year's Eve coming up here in just a couple of days. So please be safe out there. Don't do anything stupid, and think of your fellow man before you do something stupid. Okay. But we got a good episode for you this week. We have obviously the college football playoff coming up. We've got bowl games. We got the NFL. We've had some unfortunate passings in the National Football League with John Madden. We've got a great guest. We have a longtime sports media member here in the Tampa Bay area, Joey Johnston. Joey has been a writer for the Tampa Tribune. Was a writer with the Tampa Tribune for over 30 years. Has been a mainstay in the Tampa Bay media market. Covered everything you can think of, from football to golf to basketball to baseball. Joey is a Hall of Fame voter in Major League Baseball. So I'll ask him, I've got a question or two about that facet. But Joey, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Jason. It's great to be with you. Great to talk to a former Leto Falcon, soccer great. So always glad to share some information with somebody who's had a lot to do with prep sports around here. So great to be with you.
We'll start there. So you joined the Tribune in 1981, right out of the University of South Florida. And I know you've covered a lot of prep sports in your day. Talk to us about, covering prep sports and how cool that is as a young reporter, and even as a experienced reporter, doing that kind of stuff, being different places on whether it's a Friday night football or a Tuesday night at Leto covering a soccer match or whatever it is.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I would say when I was a little kid, before I was in high school, I followed high school sports, and I looked at those guys as almost like superstars, like professional athletes, and I knew all their names. I could tell you who played for who all over Tampa. So I had a big interest in it, and obviously when I was in high school, played and watched and loved it then, and had always followed it. And then I was at age 19, started writing for the Tampa Tribune and covering it. And,
Wow.
and it didn't take long. I was interested. So I fell right into it, and didn't matter the sport: football, basketball, baseball, soccer, softball, whatever. I was interested in it, and I you didn't have to explain the rivalries. You didn't have to explain what it all meant, because I already knew that kind of thing. So I plugged right into it and and I wasn't that much older than some of these guys, at that time, really not much older at all, but met and covered a lot of great athletes who went on to bigger and better things. And I get a real kick out of meeting a lot of them now, who are maybe doctors, lawyers, professional people, business owners, moms, dads.
Yeah.
And I mean, I have had the experience of covering their kids too. That's where you really know you're getting older. And I probably I've covered a grandkid at this point of an athlete back in the day. So it's been great. And even though I've been fortunate to do a lot of other things, I have always felt like that's my base. That's my real love, is what goes on in Tampa. So I still, if there's a hot athlete, a big basketball player or football player out there, I make it a point to go see him, because I like to say, that I saw that person coming up when they go on to bigger and better things.
I mean, to think about it, you probably have covering guys probably in the 80s, especially when you probably did that a lot early in your career. The Dwight Goodens, the Gary Sheffields of the world, all these Hall of Fame guys that have come out of the Tampa Bay area, whether it's baseball, football, basketball. You could probably put together a hell of a lineup of guys that have been unbelievable professional athletes and icons over the years.
Well, and you're right. I came along I think I've had good timing in a lot of ways. A lot of the various things I've experienced in my career, I've come across some great people at the moment that I was covering that particular sport. But in the early 80s, especially, high school baseball was unbelievable here. And a few years ago, USA Today did a story on baseball players from Tampa, and somebody passed my name to the guy, and he called me up and interviewed me, and we were just chatting, and I was saying, yeah, I remember being, 21-year-old kid covering there's a Dwight Gooden pitching to Fred McGriff.
Yeah.
And then a little later on, there's Tino Martinez and Gary Sheffield and Luis Gonzalez playing. And he said, man, that must have been really, really special. That must have been remarkable to witness something like that. And I go, well, it was, but to be honest, at the time, it was Tuesday afternoon is what it was. It was a Tuesday afternoon in Tampa. It wasn't that unusual, to be honest with you. That was just what we did around here. And we knew Dwight Gooden was good, and we knew Fred McGriff was good. But they were part of a lot of good players in Hillsborough County at that time. But it is remarkable to look back and say, wow, yeah, that Hillsborough Jefferson game, that was Gooden pitching McGriff, and those guys both went on to have great big league careers. So, and it hasn't stopped. I mean, we have all the way to Pete Alonso and the people of the new generation. It has been remarkable. I think we're almost up to like 90 players who have made the big leagues from Tampa / Hillsborough County. And I know there's a bumper crop on the way beyond Pete Alonso. So this is a cycle I think that will continue.
Yeah, Kyle Tucker from Plants blossoming and all. I mean, just those kind of, from football players like Mike Williams from Plant High School, who's now back coaching in the Tampa Bay area as a high school coach, #1 draft pick, USC, all that stuff. And I mean, just the guys, like I said, the guys that have come out of this area and all these different sports is incredible. And talk to us about talk to the audience about, again, back in the 80s, 90s, even early 2000s, the newspaper was the place to get all that information. There wasn't nearly the internet access as there is now. The Tampa Tribune was a huge sports department. You were working with guys like Tom McEwen, Ira Kaufman, Nick Pugliese, Roy Cummings. You guys had a big department. You were able to cover and finance and resource these things and cover these things on a day-to-day basis for the community.
Yeah, it was, the kids of today have no idea what it was like back in my era. If you were a reasonably good high school athlete, the odds were pretty strong that you were going to have a story written about you at some point. And that was just the way it was. It was wall-to-wall coverage, and you could pick up the newspaper and know exactly who was winning the games and what it all meant and who the stars of all the schools were. And I think probably that had to help, the fan interest. Now it's difficult to keep up with it. I know there's a lot of things on the internet, but I tell you, I have to really look sometimes to know what's a big game in town and who's the good player. Back in the days of the Tribune, it was all kind of laid out for you. So it was definitely a golden era of high school coverage. And I know the kids back then, I know they really enjoyed, as did the parents, that kind of coverage, because we don't quite get that these days.
Yeah, I remember I was a kid of the 90s as far as a high school kid, and I remember we had a decent team. We weren't great, but every Saturday morning there would be a little write-up about our game. I mean, if it was a big game, you'd get 3 or 4 paragraphs, but they would cover, you guys would cover every game, and big papers around the country, not just Tampa, but big papers. That was a huge part of their readership, was the moms and dads wanted to check the paper the next day to see their box scores and all that stuff. Yeah.
And the funny thing is going back further than that, there used to be an afternoon paper, the Tampa Times, that folded because there came a time when afternoon papers were kind of on the way out because of television and whatnot. But I remember growing up, the Tampa Times had a weekly Little League section where you play a Little League game and you got written up. I mean, it was almost ridiculous how much coverage there was. But I know, I'm sure those kids and those parents have saved those articles, and I know I've come across guys in later years, that I covered, and I would meet them, and they would tell me, oh, I still have my scrapbook, I still have all these articles, and that's really cool. That something you wrote like that people save it and treasure it. That means a lot.
I do too. My father's got a scrapbook of my, high school career, and I'm sure you probably wrote one of those. I guarantee you probably wrote one of those write-ups about, Friday night football or a soccer match or something. So you're absolutely right. I'm one of those kids too. So, all right. So you start to progress through your career. You start to, again, you're with the Tribune, but you get some bigger assignments. You start covering, whether it's the Bucks, whether it's, Major League Baseball, things like that. How competitive, tell the audience again, you had some heavyweights that worked in your guys' sports department. how competitive was it amongst you guys? How cool was it when you guys would sit in the office on a whatever day of the week and divvy up who's going to cover what, and the competitiveness of just being a writer in this market?
Yeah, well, I think competitiveness was probably geared more toward like the St. Pete Times or whatever newspaper you were competing against. I think we probably had a little more camaraderie and helped each other, and or more of a family feel. But I tell you, there was nothing like the old days being with all the sports writers and just the stories they would tell and the jokes they would tell. It was hilarious. It was a group of very entertaining people. In fact, I remember back in that era, we would when we would all be in the office, we would on a Friday, we would all go to Ybor City to Carmine's to have lunch, and sometimes we'd have like 20 people at the table. It was ridiculous, and just the stories were flowing. It was hilarious. And one week I remember one of the guys knew a comedian who was in town performing that night, and he came to lunch with us, a professional comedian, and he's sitting at the table, and of course he's telling his jokes and trying out his lines, and we're kind of politely laughing. And at some point somebody said, "You know what? You're like the fifth funniest guy at this table." And that was how funny we thought we were. We thought our stories were funnier than this guy, and he was a professional comedian.
That's funny. That's funny. Obviously the business of print media has really transitioned into digital media here in the last handful of years, 10, 15 years. Talk to about that transition, just how that affects any writer, not just a sports guy, but just any writer, any how the whole business of the newspaper business has changed.
It changed dramatically, and the internet, when it came, I remember this would be like in the mid to late 90s when the internet was just starting out in sports, and newspapers were putting all their stories up on the internet. And I remember somebody saying, okay, so like, all right, we publish our story in the print newspaper, we charge 25 cents, you buy the newspaper, but we put it on the internet for free. How's that going to work? And ultimately, I think that was a bad business model when you think about it. It's like saying, hey, we'd like you to buy our Hershey's chocolate bar, but if you go over here, we'll give it to you for free. So I think the expectation was built that everybody expected their information for free, and still do. I think most people, when they're looking for sports information, and I'd like to look at this story, there's a paywall, and people they get all mad at that they can't get behind the paywall. So I think the whole finances of providing information somewhere along the line just got thrown out. And then also the thing that drove the newspaper is the advertising and the classified advertising. When that collapsed, the jig was kind of up, because when you had a lifestyle where if you wanted to put an ad in, you had to go to the newspaper. You wanted to sell your car, you took out a classified ad. That was what you did, and newspapers could charge premium rates for that, and consequently the profit margins were very high for newspapers. So when that collapsed, I don't know that newspapers knew exactly where to go, and they still haven't recovered. So they're trying desperately in a lot of cases to make digital newspapers and digital news into some profit, but it's not nearly what it once was back in the days of print, and it never will be. So it's an adaptation, but the old business model will never come back. So and there's so much information out there now provided by so many different sources that newspapers are sort of lost in the shuffle. I mean, certainly they have the history and the authority for the most part, but I don't know that the new generation identifies a newspaper as the big source on, like, the Bucks. They might look somewhere else for Bucks information.
I mean, freaking Twitter.
Yeah, back in my day, you looked at the Times and the Tribune. That was where you got your Bucks information. Now it's like the Times is just as one of the voices, not the voice.
Or you watch the channel, the 11 o'clock news at 11:20 to see the sports guy do his 5 minutes on the day's events, and that's where you'd hear about the Bucks news and all that kind of stuff. If you missed, if you didn't get the newspaper.
The other thing that's really changed, and with the internet, it's all instant. You want to get, if you have a scoop or you have information, you want to get it out there as soon as possible. That's very different than when I was in the middle of the newspaper. Let's say you're covering the Bucks for the Tribune and competing against the Times and other papers, and let's say it's noon and you've just found out something. You're onto a story that you believe no one else has. Well, what you did then was you protected that story. You got really quiet. You carried it like a little baby, and you bundled it up, and you tried like heck to make sure that nobody was onto your source or onto your story, and you sweated it out through the night, and then you woke up the next morning, and that was when you knew, do I have it or not? Did they get it too? And some days that walk down the driveway was really thrilling, and some days it was devastating, because we all of us who are sports writers, we know what it's like to beat other people on a story, and we certainly know what it's like to be beaten on a story. The good thing is you always had the next day, you could turn it around, but to be the guy that got beat, that was a bad day. That was a bad morning, but you had to work like heck to kind of turn that around.
Has this always been what you wanted to do, be a sports writer, or and is this what has been your passion of what you wanted to do when you were in college?
Yeah, I mean, sports were always a passion. I followed them like crazy. I was one of those kids, maybe you were too, that knew all the stats, and everybody said, "How do you know that stuff?" And I was just one of those kids that knew it and loved it. And I liked to write, but I didn't really set out to be a writer. What happened was I was majoring in communications and thought maybe in broadcasting or advertising, or I wasn't really sure. But while I was in college, found out the Tribune needed somebody to help cover high school basketball. That was really how it started. I went out that night, covered a game, and thought that was pretty cool, and just kind of fell in love with being in a newsroom with all the quirky characters, and just thought, oh, this is really cool. I'd like to do this. And I just kind of grew on me. But I wasn't one of those 10-year-old kids that said, I'm going to write for a newspaper. It kind of happened by accident.
Interesting. Cool. Give me a couple of events that were just great to cover, fun events outside of your Super Bowl, big World Series, kind of an off the radar couple of events that you really, really enjoyed covering.
The best event I've ever covered is Wimbledon. I had a 6-year run as a tennis writer, which was really weird because tennis was not a sport that I knew a lot about or really cared about growing up. I certainly would watch Wimbledon, the US Open, knew the major players, but was not into the sport to that degree. But they assigned it to me, and I tried to learn it as fast as I could. But I came along at a time when the Tribune had money to spend, so I went to Wimbledon 3 straight summers.
Wow.
Went to the US Open a bunch of times, which is
unheard of now.
Trip to London and a trip to New York every year. That's pretty cool. And also got to cover all the Florida tournaments. And I also came along at a time when a kid from Dade City named Jim Courier became #1 in the world.
Yes.
Jennifer Capriati trained in our backyard, as did Monica Seles, as did Pete Sampras, as did Andre Agassi.
Yes.
So to them, I was their reporter. I was their hometown guy, and they were my hometown athletes. So it was an absolute blast to be covering tennis at that time. But Wimbledon was a magical place, just a wonderful place to go. And the greatest part was, because of the time change, you're over in Europe, you could watch the first match to the last match, and then assess what you wanted to write and have lots of time to write it. You had you had gobs of time. The deadlines were wonderful. So that was an experience unlike any other. Beyond that, I would say, of course, covering Super Bowls in Tampa were very special. But I think any time I got to cover one of the local or state teams winning a championship was pretty cool, like the Bucks winning the Super Bowl, the Lightning winning the Stanley Cup, and I got to cover Florida State, and Miami winning national football titles. Got to cover every game of the tournaments when the University of Florida won back-to-back basketball championships, which we didn't think we'd see that ever happen in this state. So those were all special moments, and I would just, again, incredible timing just to be able to be there for all of that. So I think those are probably my big bucket list items that I was able to achieve.
Awesome. Well, you're listening to the Powers on Sports podcast. We're talking to Joey Johnston, longtime sports media writer in the Tampa Bay area. He's the president and CEO of Johnston Communications. he's covered it all from NFL to high school to everything in between. So one thing I want to do is I want to transition to, we've lost a couple guys in the NFL world this week, John Madden and another reporter, Jeff Dickerson, up to cover the Chicago Bears. I know you have a very interesting John Madden story from when he first started his broadcasting career, and you may be able to help me with this. Was his first ever game in Tampa Stadium? Was that the first game he ever covered?
No,
I thought it
yes.
was. Tell me about your John Madden interaction.
This was not the game that I was involved with him, but he covered the Bucks Vikings game in 1979, and this was for longtime Bucks fans will remember this. This was the Bucks were. This was the fourth year of the franchise, and Doug Williams was in his second year as the quarterback, and the Bucks were having a fantastic year. They were 9-3, and they were leading the division, and all they had to do was beat the Vikings, and they won the division. They were in the playoffs, and it was a frantic, crazy game. The Bucks ended up losing 23-22, and their extra point got blocked in the last few seconds, and then the Bucks would go on to lose their next two, and they almost spun right out of the playoffs, but they ended up beating the Chiefs to clinch. But that Bucks Vikings game was the first time Madden called the game. But it was kind of like, oh yeah, Coach Madden, we'll try him out. And it was back then nobody had any concept that this guy was going to be the greatest of all time.
Right.
So the next year, I was still in college at USF, and I was one of those kids trying to break into sports. So I was working with the Bucks, and they would have me work at their games. And 1 week I would, work in the press box. 1 week I would help the radio team or the TV crew. And it was always a different job. It was really fun. So this particular week, the Bucks were playing the Bears, as I recall. And so they assigned me to the CBS spotter statistician. And it was Gary Bender and John Madden. John Madden was not yet working with Pat Summerall.
Right.
So, and everything was done by hand. I was scratching out these stats on little note cards and holding them up so Coach Madden could see them. It was, I just remember it was frantic. I was writing something down on every play, holding it up so he could look at it. But I had a good game. I was doing the right thing. I had the good information, and the flow was working really good. So I felt like, oh, okay, I'm doing a good job here. So we got done, and I don't know, there must have been a few hundred note cards all over the floor, because and I'd hold them up and then I'd throw them on the floor, and it was just, the place was littered with note cards. But anyway, I felt good about what I'd done, and Coach Madden looked at me and he said, "Young man, thank you so much. You're the best statistician I've ever worked with." And he reached in his pocket and pulled out $20 and gave it to me. I just thought, oh man, that's the greatest thing ever. I was awesome. Looking at that $20 like it was a piece of gold. And I went over to Rick Odioso, who was the Bucks PR guy who set me up, and I was, I guess, trying to impress him. I go, "Rick, guess what? Coach Madden gave me $20. He said I'm the best statistician he ever worked with." And Rick looked at me and says, "Oh yeah, that's really great. This is like his third game he's ever worked. Yeah, big deal." But I was still happy with it. I still took a lot of pride in it. And you fast forward to Super Bowl 43 in Tampa. The Steelers and Cardinals, a great Super Bowl game. And just by sheer coincidence, John Madden's working the game with Al Michaels, and it turns out to be his last broadcast.
Right.
So, he was made available for interviews during that week, and I kind of waited it out until he was done, walked out with him, and was just explaining, "Hey, many years ago, I was this kid, I was doing your stats, and you gave me $20, and you really made me feel good." And he was like, "Oh, that's great, kid. That's so great, that you're still working and as a sports writer." So it's kind of a cool moment to let him know that, he did a nice thing for a kid back then, and I never forgot it.
That's awesome. That's tremendous. Talk about talking and interviewing and developing relationships with different colorful figures in sports, from the John Grudens of the world to John Madden to everybody else in between, the Lou Pinellas of the world that are from the, talk about just how, when you develop that relationship, how much they'll provide you information, or other times when they're just, whether it's off the field stuff, they'll just be your buddy, like you're having a beer at the bar.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the guys you mentioned, the Tampa connection is so important. And back when I started out, Tom McEwen was the sports editor, and he had his kind of his rules or his suggestions on how you're supposed to operate, and really one of his big things was, hey, work that local angle and get to know your local athletes and maintain those relationships. So I certainly took that to heart, and it's amazing how you could be at a big time sporting event with national media everywhere, but if the guy is from Tampa, he really would always make time for the Tampa Tribune because of the relationships that we established. I know, when John Gruden, I'm to be honest, I mostly covered his brother, Jay Gruden. He was the quarterback at Chamberlain.
Yes.
And I wrote a lot of stories about him. And one thing I'll always remember, they were really good football teams at Chamberlain, and they got to the playoffs. And I wrote a big story on Jay Gruden. And I remember they ran it on the front page with a color photo, which was a big deal at the time. And I saw Jay's parents during when he was playing baseball, and they sought me out and said, "Oh, thank you so much for that story. We loved it. We appreciate it." And I was that's so cool, because you don't always get those kind of compliments. You get a lot of complaints, but you don't get compliments. So I always remembered that. And then somewhere along the line, I maintained a relationship with the Gruden family, and somewhere along the line, it was, again, Jay was my guy, that I covered. But I met John, and it was like, oh, here's Jay's brother, John. Hey, John, how's it going? What do you do? Oh, I'm trying to coach football. Oh, okay, that's cool. Good luck. And it was like, and then all these years later, here he comes back as the Bucks coach. It's like, wow, that's Jay's brother. He's the Bucks coach. That's so crazy. So it's funny how, John was the unknown one for many years, at least to me, and then he becomes this larger than life head coach.
Incredible. Yeah, it's incredible. All right. So the Outback Bowl, it's bowl season here. We're about to be on New Year's Day, all the big bowl games. Obviously, Tampa is in the bowl mix as well with the Outback Bowl, which used to be the Hall of Fame Bowl way back in the day when it moved. I think it moved from Birmingham to Tampa back in the mid 80s. In 1986, I believe, was the first year of the Hall of Fame Bowl in Tampa. Then it turned into the Outback Bowl. Covering bowl games and all that stuff. I'm going to tell you a story. 1986, first ever bowl, Hall of Fame Bowl, Georgia, Boston College. My father was involved with the bowl committee. He would pick up the officials from the hotel and drive them to the game, and then drive them back to the hotel after the game. Well, my dad got me a pass. I was probably 13 years old at the time. I was right in the corner, and you probably remember this. You were probably there when they threw the game-winning fade in the corner of the end zone, that first ever game. I was literally 3 feet away from the receiver when he caught it.
Oh, wow.
And I got smashed in the pile up with all the Boston College guys.
Oh my God. Do you have a video of that moment?
I do, actually.
That's great.
My dad knew Charlie Tuggle, which you probably know from Channel 8 way back in the day. Yeah. He had a video of that. I have a video of that clip somewhere. 1986, getting piled up in the game-winning throw in the end zone.
Oh my gosh. You may remember, I believe that game was played on December 23rd, 2 days before Christmas.
That sounds about right.
It was at night, and it was a tremendous rainstorm.
Yes.
You probably remember that. It was, I mean, the heavens opened. It was awful weather, lightning and huge rain. It held the crowd way down, but it was still a tremendously exciting game. And another thing that I remember, the halftime performer was supposed to be James Brown.
Wow.
The famous James Brown, I Feel Good. And he never performed because I guess there was a fear of his equipment, he'd get electrocuted or something. So he didn't take the stage. So, unfortunately, that Hall of Fame Bowl had a great opening act, but he never got on the stage.
Interesting. Now it's the Outback Bowl. You just came from the Outback Bowl, an event tonight here in the Tampa Bay area. Just talk about what that bowl means to the Bay Area and how important that's been to this area for the last, it's been 35 years now.
This is game 36.
Yeah.
This game has grown tremendously. I mean, it has the longest title sponsor affiliation of any bowl. Outback came aboard, I think it was 1995, and has continuously been the sponsor of all these other bowls you see changing a lot with the sponsorships.
Yep.
So Outback has been very stable, and who in America doesn't know what Outback Steakhouse is? So it's a brand that everybody knows and likes.
And it started in Tampa. People don't realize it started in Tampa.
On Henderson Boulevard. I ate at that restaurant. Yeah, about 2 weeks after it opened. Yep. The format of the game. Well, first of all, it was Hall of Fame Bowl, then it changed the Outback Bowl, but also the affiliations of the teams changed a bit. For a while, they were taking ACC teams, and they were taking independents and SEC. They were kind of all over the map. But at some point there, they locked into the SEC and the Big Ten, and that turned out to be a great decision because everybody loves an SEC Big Ten bowl game. That's kind of a formula that doesn't miss. You see a lot of SEC Big Ten matchups, and those two conferences really go at it, and that's a formula I think that served them well because you get Alabama, Auburn, LSU, Florida, and then you get the Ohio States, Penn States, Michigans, Iowa. Those are pretty powerful brand names in college football, and they are going to get two of those. And now it's interesting, I guess in a few years, we might have Oklahoma or Texas playing in the Outback Bowl, in the new SEC. So it could be really wild, but it brings a lot of people into the community. They spend a lot of money. They get to enjoy our community. And I know there's a lot of attention placed on guys who go on to play in the pros or become first round picks, or there's ton of Tom Brady played in the game once upon a time. I mean, there's been a lot of tremendous alumni, but there's also a lot of people. Most of the people are guys that, are just finishing up their college career. This is like their biggest moment ever, and they cherish playing in the Outback Bowl. You talk to them 10, 20 years later, it's one of the great memories of their life. So that's something that's very special about this game. And I know, whoever the big time players are for Arkansas, Penn State, we'll see them in the pros, but most of these guys are like, wow, remember that time we got to go to Tampa and have all that fun? And it's gonna be a huge memory for all those guys.
Give me an opinion on the games New Year's Eve: Alabama, Cincinnati, Georgia, Michigan.
I like Alabama. I like Michigan. Wow. I have a lot of respect for Cincinnati, but you just can't go against Alabama when it matters in a game like this. And Cincinnati's never really been in a game like this.
Right.
I hope they can keep it to a good game. I could see Alabama dominating, but I hope Cincinnati's up to the task. Georgia's had a great year. Their defense is tremendous, but I just don't trust their offense enough. I think it's going to be a low-scoring game, and Michigan's going to prevail. Alabama and Michigan's a pretty good matchup if that turns out for the national title. Those are two of the greatest names in college football history. Again, I got to go with Alabama. I mean, I think anytime you go against Alabama, you're taking a big risk. So it's not exactly brain surgery here to pick Alabama, but that's who I'm liking right now.
All right, I get a couple more and get you out of here. Give me a projection on the Buccaneers moving forward. Obviously, injuries are a concern for them. Obviously, can you keep Tom Brady upright and all that stuff? How do you see the Buccaneers progressing in the playoffs?
Well, as long as they have Tom Brady, it's tough to bet against them. I mean, that gives them a chance against anybody. I don't currently like them being in the 4 seed. I think they need to get out of that 4 seed if they can, because the way it's sitting now, that gives them a home game, but it gives them the Cardinals or the Rams. I don't particularly like either one of those matchups for the Bucs. I think, and there's 2 more games left in the season. A lot of things can happen. They can get up to the 3 or the 2. Mm-hmm. I think if they can do that, that can become a more favorable matchup. The other part about being the 4 at this point, if you go to Lambeau, if they beat the Cardinals or the Rams, that means they go to Lambeau the next week in the semifinals, and that's a tough task right there. So you want to make that the last game, not the semifinals.
Right.
So that could, again, it's gonna be a tough road to hoe. I mean, we're talking about maybe going to Dallas and then to Green Bay. They're gonna have to earn it. But again, they've got Tom Brady. So I mean, I'll take my chances with Tom Brady, no matter who you're playing when you get in the playoffs. This guy is the greatest of all time. His record in the playoffs is unparalleled. So I'm looking forward to seeing it happen. I'm excited with the possibility of a home game. That'll be great. It's been since 2007 since the Bucs have played a home game in the playoffs. And in fact, I'm trying to think in my head now, I believe the Giants. The last time they won a home playoff game was 2002. Right. The first Super Bowl season. So it's been a long time since the fans have had a moment like that to enjoy. So that would be really cool.
Absolutely. All right. Last thing. You're a Hall of Fame voter in Major League Baseball, correct?
I am.
talk to the fans just about the process that you have to go through. It's a little trickier than the NFL, where the NFL puts a certain number of guys in every year, no matter what. Whereas at Hall of Fame, you have to get a certain number of percentage of the votes and all that kind of stuff in order to qualify. So some years they might have 3 guys, some years they might have no guys qualify. How have you, over the years, kind of developed your philosophy of voting, especially during the steroid era? How have you as a voter kind of measured those variables?
Well, first of all, the criteria on an individual basis is you can vote for up to 10 players. You can't go over 10. You can vote for 0. You can vote for 1, 2, 3, but at 10, you have to stop at 10. I believe I voted for 10 every time out, and I think this is my 9th or 10th year of doing it. I have been a believer in maximizing it and trying to pick the best 10. I know some guys pick 1 or 2, or they're very selective. I mean, there's a ton of guys on this ballot that I think are legitimate Hall of Famers, and I stopped at 10, and I could have easily gone for a couple more. I have always voted for Bonds and Clemens. I will say that.
Okay.
In the steroid thing, and I understand why people would have a problem with that, but my rationale is I can't legislate the morality here, and I also think these guys you can't write the history of baseball without them, and I also think what they've been accused of doing before that happened, they were certainly Hall of Fame players at that point. So I just don't think you can have a Hall of Fame museum without the guy who has the most home runs and without the guy that's won 7 Cy Youngs. I did vote for Alex Rodriguez. I did vote for Manny Ramirez. So I guess I'm pretty liberal in my approach to the PED steroid guys. But I did vote for guys like Andrew Jones.
What's your thought on What's your thought on Pete Rose?
Well, here's the thing. Pete Rose was my favorite player when I was a kid because I was a Reds fan. I grew up in Tampa. The Reds trained at Al Lopez Field. I would imitate Pete Rose's batting stance when I played baseball. I idolized Pete Rose. I, of course, was very disappointed with what's happened to him and the stance he's taken. But again, the numbers are the numbers. 42-56 are the hits. Again, it's very difficult to have a baseball museum without Pete Rose being in it. I would favor him being in the Hall of Fame. I would favor him being on the ballot. I hope if it's going to happen, it will happen in his lifetime.
Right.
I don't know that it will, though, because I don't know that there's any impetus to getting it done. So my feeling is that Pete's going to die a disappointed, bitter man. And one day he will be in the Hall of Fame, but I'm afraid he won't live to see it.
What do you think is going to happen with this lockout?
I think, first of all, nobody's going to care until the Super Bowl is over.
Right.
And then we'll start caring about baseball.
Right.
So consequently, I don't think anything's going to happen until then. I don't think anything major is going to work until February. And again, we're going to be so tied up with college and pro football until then. And then when we get close to spring training and nothing's happening, then we'll start caring. I do think the season will start either on time or very close to it. There's just too many rank and file players that need that paycheck.
Right.
And when push comes to shove, they're going to find a way to get it done. So I hope we can have a full baseball season and we won't miss too much of it because the Rays have certainly given us some great seasons here of late, and I hope they can continue with that. And yeah, let's face it, if we get to April and there's no baseball, it's going to be rough. So I'm hoping we play baseball in April for sure.
I got you. Well, Joey, it's been a real pleasure. Tell everybody where they can find you online and social media wise, and like I said, just brag about yourself a little here.
Well, my website is joeyjohnstoncommunications.com. That's where I keep a lot of my stories. I'm on Twitter at joeyjohnston813. If anybody wants to hit me up with any comments or questions, please do. And I also can be read on the USF website. I write a lot for USF, and I also do broadcasting. I do men's basketball and I'm the sideline reporter for football. So I enjoy doing that as well. And I know I was getting ready to do some games this weekend. They were both canceled by COVID at USF, and we're seeing a lot of that happen in basketball. So hopefully we won't be having another COVID crazy season in basketball, but we're not off to a good start. So I hope we get that cleared up. Do you like the direction Jeff Scott's taking the program? I do. I mean, I have to be realistic, and most fans would say, look, at some point you have to win some games. So, the first season was a wash. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
COVID, it was crazy, and just one win. Last year, they should have had more than 2 wins. That was a 5 or 6 win type of team. They could have gotten to a bowl game, but they made too many mistakes in close games, and they right down to the end of the UCF game where they were right
Right.
knocking on the door to win the game.
Yeah.
I think the bottom line to me, and Jeff Scott is addressing this, is when you look back at the really good USF teams of a few years ago, you had a lot of NFL players on the field. And here the last few years, they've had 0 NFL players on that field. So
Right.
it's really simple. They've got to upgrade the talent. They've got to recruit. They've got to keep more guys at home. They got to get out and develop some players. And that's really the secret to it. And I think they've got a good quarterback. I think they've got the start of some people around them. They're having to rebuild the whole defense
Right.
through the transfer portal mostly. So we're not going to exactly know what that's like till they take the field. But by all accounts, they're getting some good players in here. But hey, I'm realistic enough to know that year 3, you need to start making a move toward a bowl game. So that's where they need to go next year.
And the good thing is at least USF's made the financial commitment to do the things they need to do to try to be competitive. They're building a new facility, indoor facility. It looks like they've done some stuff with the athletic department and the football program itself and invest in money. So I think they're on the right track for sure.
Yeah, the indoor practice facility is going to be crazy good. It's going to be modern. All the teams are going to get to use it. And then right after that, I think there's going to be a lot of groundswell toward an on-campus stadium, which Raymond James is great, but it's it's not on campus. It's not the college atmosphere. So I know when UCF built its stadium, that was a game changer for that program and has really helped it grow. And I think the same thing will happen at USF. I remember when USF men's basketball didn't have the Sun Dome years ago.
Right.
And when they built an on-campus Sun Dome, that was huge for that program. So I think the same thing would happen for football.
Well, Joey, keep up the great work, man. I appreciate the time. Any big New Year's Eve plans?
Just kind of bunkering in, watching football, really. Just trying to stay safe and get off and go to the Outback Bowl on January 1st and hopefully have a great 2022.
Well, Joe, like I said, Joey, I really appreciate the time. Excellent work. And again, Joey's covered it all over the years. So he's a great resource. If you're in the Tampa Bay area, definitely check out Joey's work online with working with USF and all the different outlets that he's with. So Joey, appreciate the time and have a great new year.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me on. And I'll definitely start checking out your podcast. Good luck with it.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Joey. We'll be right back.